Welcome to our series, Is the Book of Mormon an Historical Account of the Lost Tribes of Israel in North America? This is episode 2B, Setting Standards, Dealing with Bias in Other Experts. In part A, we dealt with my biases. But what about the biases of other experts I bring into our discussion? How am I going to consider and contain those? That's a question you deserve an answer to as well. So here we go. It's probably a good idea to take a minute and think about what bias is. Dictionary.com defines bias as a, quote, particular tendency, trend, inclination, feeling, or opinion, especially one that is preconceived or unreasoned, unquote. So, what we're dealing with at its core is simply allowing what we are inclined to know or our feelings and hopes enter into our judgment. Have you ever heard somebody in a discussion take a position using the words, I feel like fill in the blank? This is a way of staking a claim without actually taking any risk. Your feelings are your own. They can't be debated, but they are completely removed from the fact, except to the degree that you contain your biases and what's behind them. For example, I can emotionally believe my football team is the best one ever. I can say honestly, I feel like they may win it all this year. In the end, though, it's highly unlikely that my feeling will have any influence on who takes home the trophy. The two are entirely separate, and my statement reflects my bias entirely. If I provide facts supporting my bias, I'm beginning to move towards truth. Perhaps on paper, they should even be the winners. But I can't be honest in the debate unless I set my biases aside. This is often the reason why two people can see the same game and one decides the loser was cheated while the other thinks the game was decided on a righteous call, a good decision. It's called emotional bias. Let me give you an example of what we're trying not to do here, and then I'll use that example to show how I intend to contain bias in others who I cite in order to protect you. Let's talk a little bit about the Mormon LDS missionary experience. If an LDS missionary were to visit you today, their mission would be to get you to read the Book of Mormon. They would tell you it's accurate history. They would say it's another testimony to the same gospel. They would ask you to pray and ask God about it as you read to see if you get a good feeling that it's true. And if you got a good feeling about the book, then they would encourage you to receive it as accurate history. Once you did, it would be natural to get baptized into the LDS since it means the LDS is the one true church. Now, my description above might sound biased from the start, and I'm not claiming that all Mormon missionaries always do it this way. In fact, I'll admit that this is a second-hand report. Though I live in a county where LDS membership represents 20% of the population, second in size only to Catholics, I can honestly say I've never been visited by Mormons at my home trying to evangelize me. So, how can I tell you what a Mormon missionary might tell you? I'm actually paraphrasing the experience from Sister Alyssa Grenfell, a former LDS member and mission trainer. Ah, you might exclaim, she's biased because she's an ex Mormon. And my response would be yes, in some ways she is. But she is also qualified, having helped teach and even design parts of what is done by LDS missionaries. Alyssa says her job at the Mormon Training Center was to, quote, help missionaries transform, unquote, from, quote, civilian life into the missionaries the church wanted them to be, unquote. Their approach, she claims, is heavily controlled and scripted as to what topics to discuss and avoid, and the end goal is clearly stated and managed. In addition, she is quite compassionate towards missionaries, even describing them as abused teens. She makes her claims under pretty constant attack from LDS members and fully aware that some of those that she has worked with on her podcast have already been sued by the LDS Church. Yet she continues to stand by her position about the missionary training. So, on the issue at hand, what Mormon missionaries are trained to say and do, I find her testimony credible. And that's why I present it to you. So, what's the point? I'm simply encouraging a better way of study and research with a more balanced playing field than the ground rules LDS missionaries might propose. You should expect that. Understanding source vetting, as I just demonstrated above in my citing of Sister Grenfell, is not only valid, it's important. That's why I discussed my own biases earlier. Citations are important too. You deserve to be able to know what sources anyone making a claim uses in order to vet their use of those sources. For example, I'm posting a link in the details of this video to a written copy of the white paper I wrote and used as my script here. In the endnotes there, you will find references to all my sources, including a link to Sister Grenfell's video that I used here. It's actually quite entertaining, and I encourage you to watch it. If you wanted, you could actually verify my use of her as consistent with her own claims. In addition, you might note after research that I'm citing a non Christian source. Thus, you could conclude that while the source I use is biased against LDS, she is equally biased against my own faith and qualified on the topic I cite her for. Thus, a credible expert witness in context. I'm not presenting her feelings about LDS or their missionaries. I'm citing her knowledge of what they are taught to say and do. I'm using a balanced playing field. My goal is to be heard, whether it changes your opinion or not. If you do not trust me or trust that I'm being honest with my sources, pretty soon your eyes will glass over, you'll put this work down, unless it agrees with your point of view already, and then it's kind of meaningless anyway. Feelings, the witnesses being called by LDS missionaries when in Christian homes, are not balanced or trustworthy. They simply affirm your own internal biases. I totally encourage you, if asked to do so, to read the Book of Mormon, and I would always ask you to pray for God to help see His truth in anything you read. But I would never ask you to read any book, including the Bible, without applying reasonable, scholarly analysis about its claims. We are also going to fully engage our sources in this project, meaning that we will be citing people who disagree with us and even engaging them on the ways that they do. I'm about to give you an example. Lissa, for example, suggests in her videos to be nice to LDS missionaries. She suggests to offer them friendship, home cooked food, rather than cause them to question their faith. I agree it's important to be nice to everyone, but I cannot agree on not engaging them. Sister Grenfell bases her argument on the fact that the teens are under tremendous pressure, and I agree that they probably are. They are without family or support during that time, and they often already want to leave the mission by the time they come to your house. Their schedule and restrictions on whom they can communicate with and how to communicate is isolationist and abusive. In That's my summary of what I think Sister Grenfell would agree to. Based on her description, it's even maybe cultish. She adds that the shame and abuse missionaries can get when leaving the mission early can be devastating in lifelong ways to them and their families. So she suggests not encouraging them to examine their faith. Sister Grenfell can have that position because she presents herself as a non believer in any faith, at least at this point in her life, as I understand her. My critique is that she lacks a full perspective on the damage being done to these teens. It is, from an eternity perspective, far more abusive to not address their LDS beliefs than to do so winsomely. They are, perhaps for the first time in their life, experiencing what I think Alyssa describes as cultish abuse. That's my summary of it. What a better time to show someone that you care about their eternal condition sincerely. If we walk away from this chance to rightly love them back to Jesus, are we likely to ever get another? And remember, they came to you. They are in your home. With respect to Sister Grenfell, if you are a Christian, I would argue engaging LDS missionaries lovingly towards the truth is our duty, even though it may bring them temporary internal struggle. Cults, if we agree they are so, need to be confronted precisely because their members are being abused, and it is never abusive to kindly and respectfully point that out. I would simply say things like, in my research, I found fill in the blank, and here is my source, insert your source. If that is true, I know the LDS claim that, insert the claim they just made, is not historically accurate. So I appreciate you, but I cannot agree with that position. Unquote. By the way, if you'd like to be competent at doing that and want somebody to teach you how, you've come to the right place. Stay tuned. Before I get to the list of Book of Mormon assertions we will be dealing with, let me give you an illustration that might help understand what I mean by applying a level playing field rightly. My first assignment in seminary was to read the entire Old Testament. The challenge was to comprehend it sufficiently to be able to discuss how the sections we were dealing with in class each week were about Christ, how they were Christological. Uh, to say that that was intimidating for somebody who never read the entirety of a single book of the Bible, let alone each book cover to cover, is an understatement. It was not just the size of the content, it was that it was written to and about cultures very different than mine. Kind of started that whole cultural investigation journey improper after that. I had to remove myself entirely from the story and understand the book's claim of dual authorship, men writing what God gave them. In the process, and in the process, I could see two distinct stories being told. One was clearly deeply rooted in the history of an historic, real people designed to teach all humans who we are as a species by nature. And the picture was emotionally hard to look at. It included abuse of every nature and every means, even from the men honored as prophets. The second story was God revealing his nature to us because he knew our problem patiently and lovingly. We were designed to be like him, but our rebellious nature makes it nearly impossible to do on our own. In fact, I'd say it does make it impossible to do on our own. That story, the second one, is the story of a creator God being patient, like a patient father, to a species of, well, evil brats. At the same time, I began to watch a TV series that frankly seemed to capture very nearly the same story without the part about a clear, singular, patient Father God who created everything. The series was called The Game of Thrones. While I cannot condone its violence and overt sexuality, the series was a very good tool to help me process what I was reading in the Bible. It's the same story without God intervening to save people based on his love for them. But from a scholarly standpoint, I knew instinctively that the Game of Thrones was not like the Bible. The Game of Thrones was in the genre of fiction. Now, every good work of fiction begins with a great, fully developed backstory to make it seem real. If you got the books, Game of Thrones looks in every way as real and authoritative. It has maps of the seven kingdoms. You can find detailed information about the different religions and the family history. There's a long backstory of how we got to the starting point in the book in history, and that backstory is referred to constantly to make it feel real and understood by everybody in the book. People behaved in character and consistent with their motives based on that background, and it all made sense and was presented as very real. In fact, from an emotional standpoint, when a character rose to near the top of the pecking order, who I thought had the right stuff to restore justice and peace, I wanted the story to be real. And there was almost always one or two characters to root for in that position. If you had to ask me to trust my feelings about the Game of Thrones as a means of deciding if it was real, I would have been telling everybody, winter's coming. I loved it, but I knew it wasn't real. So I treated the story differently. And it was more than the fact that you can get the book in the fiction section and the TV series is not called a documentary. I knew the maps didn't reflect real locations. I knew the people were not recorded anywhere in history. I knew that the religions and beliefs were all drawn from collections of pagan beliefs. I knew winter came not once every 100 years, but every year. And I knew when it did come that winter never brought walking dead people. I knew that nobody ever found a petrified egg and hatched it using fire to make a dragon. In fact, I knew dragons were fantasy. When a book actually claims to be history, we should expect to be able to test it the same way. Our feelings about the book really shouldn't get in the way of us assessing historicity at all. Nonetheless, if you insist on confusing feelings with evidence as we go on, ask yourself this: does this story feel more like entertainment like the Game of Thrones, or does it look, based on the evidence, like it really happened? And to help, I will be sharing the evidence of other similar finds about other things we know are historical so that you can ask yourself if your feelings align with the facts we're revealing. In the next episode, I will lay out our methodology to assure we are taking a fair, consistent approach to identifying, finding if possible, and reporting evidence of Book of Mormon historicity. How can we know what evidence is reasonable and what constitutes evidence? Stay tuned. I'll see you then.